Over the last couple of weeks, we've been having record-breaking temperature. It's actually stunning. And for example, a recent report out on the Texas drought. So it's not just last week, but it's also over the last couple of years, including not just the United States, but all over. But let me start with Texas here. The Texas drought, the new numbers are in, and they thought that it was going to cost over $5 billion in damages to crops. It's actually broken a new record by a landslide. It's going to cost $7.62 billion, according to Texas's AgriLife Extension Services. So, you know, I don't think the government of Rick Perry is pro-government or pro-climate change. So for them to say that it's cost us this much money is interesting. And the previous mark was the highest amount of damage ever done by a drought in Texas was in '06. It was at $3.5 billion. So more than double. So that's terrible news. And then in Europe, Russia had its hottest summer in 2010, actually, and then there's been record rain in Pakistan and Australia, of course, outside of Europe. And then there was a recent study published in the Journal of Natural Climate Change, and they said for some types of extreme, notably heat waves, but also precipitation extremes, there is now strong evidence linking specific events or an increase in their number to the human influence on climate. So saying that this is obviously climate change and obviously induced by man. Which brings us to the events of the last couple of weeks to connect all of these different weather events together. Dr. Jeff Masters wrote, since record keeping began in the late 1800s, there have never been so many temperature records broken for spring warmth in a one-week period. Never in record-keeping history in America, okay? So now let me give you some of those records, and then I'll show you in a graph where we stand. First of all, reports from across the country. One said what happened in Minnesota with the weather in the spring was, quote, off the scale weird. Throughout the country, over the last couple of weeks, there was over 4,300 records set in temperature. That's an enormous number. In Falls, Minnesota, they tied or broke the daily record in 11 of the past 12 days at that time in those weeks. In Chicago, they broke the record high 8 days in a row. In March, U.S. heat records outnumbered cold records by a stunning 35-to-1 margin. So the reason I tell you that is every once in a while, you know, Fox News will go in the middle of winter and show a snowstorm and go, what happened to climate? What happened to global warming? There's no warming. But in March, here's an example of, first of all, it's not just warming. Climate change leads to extreme weather events in all directions, but overall the planet warms. So in March, for example, by a 35-to-1 margin, there was warm records broken rather than cold records. Now let me show you the chart here and where 2011 stands on the chart of extreme weather and temperature. Go ahead and put that up, Jesus. Yeah, there it is. So that's it for Texas that we were talking about earlier, right? So you see all the other numbers in that graph? Now, I don't know if you noticed, but there's a big red dot up top at 2011. It's literally off the chart, okay? So now you begin to wonder, are all these things just a coincidence, and all the twisters that we've been having, all the extreme weather events that we've been having? And obviously the scientists are saying, you knuckleheads, this is what we've been warning you about. Of course it's not a coincidence. In fact, look at some other notable things here. And as you look at this, you begin to get a sense of like, this is not normal, man. You know, because of course everybody's used to weather fluctuations, and sometimes you have record highs and sometimes record lows. But the last decade was the warmest decade in history. This is not a coincidence. Here we go. In Pelson, Michigan, they broke a record high, but they broke it by 32 degrees. Can you imagine? They didn't go 1 or 2 degrees above the record. They went 32 degrees above the record for that day. Low temperatures have beaten the previous record for high temperatures in 2 different stations. Let me explain what that means. So in 2 different cities, the previous high was, for example, let me give you the exact numbers here because I think I have them. Would be 48 degrees as an example, right? And the low temperature for that day was 53 degrees. So the lowest they ever got on that day was higher than the previous record. It gives you a sense of how gigantic these changes are. Now, and then multiple Canadian cities broke all-time April records in March, meaning that it never got to that temperature in April in the history of Canada, and it got to that temperature in March. Gee, I wonder if global warming is happening.